This is the continuation of a previous video. If you did not watch this video, well, you don't necessarily need to watch that one before watching this one, but I would prefer you watch that one first, because, I don't know, just build up to the big epic reveal of number 1. You've seen the worst, now it's time to see the best. Quick reiteration about the rules though. We will only be focusing on the 10 years, which mostly helps certain people other than others. We are only doing ones that happened after the 1917 Constitution was established, and AMLO will not be on the list. Too early in his tenure to officially give him a 100% good or 100% bad. And the one pre-revolutionary good one that I will be mentioning, the honorable mention, is one that's kind of obvious. Benito Juarez. I don't even have to get into his actual policies or anything he enacted during his tenure, because it's just kind of obvious that Mexico really likes Benito. I mean, he's the only Mexican president that has a holiday all to himself. That kind of shows that he's at least somewhat popular. With all that out of the way, here are the top 10 best Mexican presidents post-revolution. Number 10, Pascual Ortiz Rubio. Rubio actually did not accomplish much during his tenure. He passed a labor law and he made a park. Nothing too special. So, why is he in the top 10? Well, for starters, other Mexican presidents were just not that up to snuff, really. Last list was pretty bad, all things considered. And, technically we're in the area where it's kind of the middle of the list, so he's kind of got slightly above average tenure, like Emilio Portes Gil, who's number 11. But one thing that makes him at least somewhat notable was that he was the first Mexican president to criticize El Jefe Maximo, the guy who he owed pretty much his entire political career to, especially the presidency. And he was smart enough to know, I gotta get out of here before things get really bad, because he's making me do a lot of interesting things. Not too bad, and not too notable. But we'll only go up from here. Number 9, Jose Lopez Portillo. Mexican James Monroe over here had a pretty decent amount of flaws. He faced critiques of corruption like pretty much every other pre-president there was. And the economy had a couple of peaks and valleys during his tenure. And after his tenure, he apparently supported Lyndon LaRouche for the 2000 American presidential election for some reason. But there was one good thing that kind of just propels him all the way to the top. His reforms of the Mexican electoral system were pretty much just being the first nail in the coffin to the PRI's one-party rule, and actually helped minor parties, ones that would eventually overthrow the Mexican presidency, thrive. And if you know me, I like me some minor parties. So Portillo, slightly above average. Number 8, Abelardo L. Rodriguez. The last Maximano president, Abelardo kind of lucked out because Calles was sick for a majority of his tenure, so he was able to govern as his own individual. And he wasn't really that bad in his governance. He was super friendly to workers with raising wages, supporting unions, and creating a Department of Labor. He restored public education and rebuilt Mexico's infrastructure. Surprisingly, when a, sort of fascist guy kind of doesn't badger you for being whatever, you can kind of get things done. Overall, I'd say he's pretty good, given a majority of his competitors. Although, speaking of his competitors, number 7, Plutarco Elias Calles. No, hold on. Look, I know Calles became El Jefe Maximo, and that docks him points pretty decently. When I was writing this, he was originally much higher because I added the caveat of, only their administration, but then I'm well, come on. Being El Jefe Maximo's gotta dock him, at least some points. But let's be real, his actual presidential tenure is not that bad. I mean, before he went all Lyndon LaRouche on us, he was supporting workers' groups, specifically CROM. He was starting to initiate fixing Mexico's infrastructure. He was pushing for some strengthening of public health programs. And, I originally compared him to LBJ in my video because his biggest fault during his presidency was the Cristero War. I sort of get the intention of the Cristero War. Nobody should want Mexico or any other country to be ruled by a religious group. But I mean, you can do that without needing to kill 50,000 people. I mean, some other Mexican presidents were able to handle that. Wink, wink. That was probably a clue to what would eventually become his fascist shift down the line. That's not good. Even if some other presidents go, he's water on the bridge, that's gotta dock him at least a decent number of points. But overall, his administration itself was, he was running and was a part of the Laborist Party. It wasn't that particularly bad, although maybe Pancho Villa might have been a better president, I don't know. Number 6, Venustiano Carranza. The equivalent of George Washington in post-Mexican Revolution. By that I mean, he had pretty much just the sole duty of setting the precedents for future presidents and pretty much trying to make sure the country doesn't fall back into disarray. The Constitution was a whole lot more progressive than he was. It had things like an 8-hour workday, abolishing child labor, and workers' protections. But, he didn't necessarily abide by a majority of these constitutional rules. The Constitution also had an extremely anti-Catholic sentiment, but, Carranza didn't necessarily enforce them, and they were not enforced until the previously mentioned Calles started getting into the presidency. It wasn't as progressive as someone like Emiliano Zapata would have given us, but it was probably the furthest left Carranza would actually go. In regards to his actual presidential tenure, he didn't really do much to rapidly change Mexico, but he did try to push for a lot of things to show Mexico was changing for the better. He instituted universal suffrage, for men, but that's step 1. Setting the one-term precedent in regards to the presidency, because Porfirio Diaz and even to an extent Benito Juarez kind of overstayed their welcome. Another thing he tried to do in response to the, Porfirio Diaz administration was that he tried to stop all members of the military from becoming president. Well, the second thing was kind of not accomplished and was more than likely kind of trying to quell political opposition. It seemed rather well-intentioned, and overall, much like how Emilio Portes Gil wanted to stop individuals from enriching themselves as government agents, it was probably a good idea that should have probably went through. Although, Carranza, he also did some pretty bad things, like kill Zapata, so yeah. Number 5, Manuel Avila Camacho. The best word to describe Camacho's administration is unity. The only reason he was chosen to be the candidate over the incumbent president's ideological mentor was so that he could prevent Mexico from going on a full-on civil war, unify the country. It didn't quite work out how the party wanted things to pan out, but again, well-intentioned. There was literally a time where Camacho decided he was going to invite all of the Mexican presidents that were still alive, including the one that was literally kicked out of the country for being a thinly veiled dictator, and hold this whole, hey, we all want the same thing to make Mexico a better place. What's so good, bro? That's pretty much as unity as you can get. Literally inviting the literal fascists to go, hey, water under the bridge, right, bro? Policy-wise, he wasn't particularly that bad either. Granted, he was more conservative or just moderate compared to his predecessor, he did have a lot of good things. He created the Mexican Social Security Institute, continued many of the reforms of his predecessor, and again, while he was technically the start of what would eventually be Mexico's neoliberal fall, he was probably just, oh yeah, fine, I'm a bit moderate, so what? I mean, he's not particularly bad. I mean, he was friends with FDR, so that should be an indication, right? Number 4, Adolfo Lopez Mateos. And Adolfo, who was actually able to have enough time to govern. While he was originally more in the Miguel Valdez crowd, he received pressure from the PRI's leftist base and president that might be named soon to enact a whole lot more leftist policies in regards to Mexico. That aforementioned president literally flew to Cuba and gave a speech next to Fidel Castro, basically trying to say, like, it's amazing, this magical leftist revolution that happened in a Latin American country. This would be pretty cool. Am I right, Mexico? And you know what he decided to do? Mateos was mad, so you know what he decided to do? He decided to adopt like-minded policies of this predecessor out of spite. Yes, he actually nationalized the electricity industry, fought for adult literacy programs, enacted many social welfare programs, and enacted huge land redistribution out of spite to the Mexican left. That's actually pretty impressive. Like, oh yeah, I'll show you leftists. It's pretty funny. Now, to be fair, he is just the second best Adolfo, because Mateos did do some things that are definitely his more neoliberal side, showing, oppressing student activities, and his handpicked successor was pretty much the worst. Like, he was the guy who appointed Ordaz. Ordaz is his fault, so it's definitely gonna dock you some points, bro. Sorry. Oh, speaking of Adolfo, number 3, Adolfo Ruiz Cortines. Top tier Adolfo right here, folks. He was similar to the previous Adolfo, but the differences make him better. For one, the aforementioned Mexican president that I keep not naming, even though we all 100% know who he is, did not actually oppose Cortines' nomination. Rather, Cortines got some smaller leftist opposition. And 2, he actually really didn't like the corruption and cronyism that Valdez's administration brought, so he was actually more susceptible and accepting of the leftist base and actually wanted to improve Mexico and rebuild the PRI's image. Immediately after getting elected, he started a mass anti-corruption campaign, and pretty soon afterwards, he launched a huge vaccination program and eliminated malaria in Mexico. Though his biggest accomplishment, I would probably argue, was giving women the right to vote in Mexico. I mean, this aforementioned president tried to do that, but Cortines was successful in this regard, so I guess we have to make him best Adolfo. He's not only in the top 3 Adolfos, but he's also in the top 3 presidents. Number 2, Alvaro Obregón. After they did that whole electing a partially apolitical general, Mexico's first forte into an ideological president was straight to the left, because Obregón owed his presidential victory to both labor unions and the OG Zapatistas, the people who were the most angry in regards to the Porfirio Diaz administration. So, he gave them what they wanted. Laws that were extremely pro-labor, pro-CROM, because Mexico had this weird phase where CROM was their, official state union, like the USSR to a degree, and he redistributed 2,277,389 acres of land, as much as a person who wasn't really into the whole land redistribution thing would give away. Obregón also led a huge cultural boom with artists like Diego Rivera, David Alfaro Siqueiros, Jose Clemente Orozco, and Roberto Montenegro becoming prevalent artists and pretty much making Mexico's culture post-revolution. You see, everybody was so busy fighting that they didn't really have a set culture in mind, so these artists came together and made that culture, mixing up not only some of the things that the Spanish brought, but also Mexico's indigenous roots. He was also the first president to peacefully pass the torch to a successor before the revolution, though he did get some docked points for being teensy-weensy bit power-hungry. I mean, he kind of did take over the presidency during a literal coup, and he kind of sort of also made like a political dynasty that kind of ruled over Mexico for a little bit, and his successor did end up becoming a fascist leader. But hey, he was also Mexico's first disabled president. That's something. And as it comes to a surprise to literally nobody, number 1, Lázaro Cárdenas. Yeah, it's pretty obvious. This was 100% obvious going into the video, going into the series. I guarantee you there were people who probably knew about Mexican presidents who were watching my series, and then they were thinking, oh, does he know about Cárdenas? Or I know who he probably likes Cárdenas, so there's something there. But yeah, Cárdenas is pretty much the granddaddy of the Mexican left, and Mexico's most popular president post-revolution. Remember, Juárez has pre-revolution all set into the stone. He was truly the candidate that best embodied the Mexican Revolution. He literally exiled Calles for following the route of Porfirio Diaz. Pretty much his entire 6-year plan was good, helping the poor and indigenous populations with education opportunities, which did a better job at lessening the Catholic Church's power than literal massacres. He redistributed 45 million acres of land. I guarantee you, if Zapata wasn't already dead, he definitely would have had a heart attack just seeing that number alone. And of course, his biggest policy being the nationalization of Mexican oil via Pemex, which pretty much became the untouchable thing in Mexican politics. I mean, the PRI's biggest electoral failure was literally because the incumbent president privatized Pemex, and then their candidate responded with, yeah, let's keep privatizing it more. Like, really? That's 100% what it is. That's what cost them their election. Their base was literally built on the idea of keeping Pemex around. Pemex is literally a sort of Mexican pride thing. Like, all Latin American countries, they take pride in their nationalized oil industries because it benefits them more than the privatized industries. Literally, one of the few people who was able to beat the PRI was literally running on a Lázaro Cárdenas-like platform. Now, we'll find out if he actually lives up to that platform, but overall, Cárdenas was great. One of the greatest Mexico's had thus far, and again, let's see how a person who's trying to model himself off of Cárdenas, as well as Juárez, tries to actually get to the level of the OGs. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on this field. Mexican presidents, they did pretty aight with him. You know, you could do better. I mean, no, you can't with Cárdenas as your options. You can't really do better at all. Juárez is probably the closest you'll get, but either way, that's how I rank the Mexican presidents post-revolution. If I continue my series up to the pre-revolution presidencies, maybe we'll see how Benito Juárez and the rest rank up to these guys. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or check out my articles on the Independent Political Report.